So if you have questions for me, hold them, because I'll have to stop the slideshow if you ask me.
It's a kind of user interface.
Yeah. All right. So thank you for giving us some time today. I know this is a little bit different than maybe what you get in these talks, and I also understand that it looks like there's a lot of faculty and graduate students here. I'm going to talk about the undergrad programs a lot, but I'm hoping you see as professors and those who work with your undergrads can talk with them about the stuff that we're doing. So I want to begin by telling you a little bit about our department. Probably 6 or 7 years ago, some professors of English became disgruntled and worked with the Arts and Sciences Dean to create a standalone division of rhetoric and writing. I won't bore you with this long history, but scholars and teachers of writing and rhetoric don't necessarily do the same things that scholars of literature do. And so at UK, a new department was formed called Word. In the fall of 2014, we officially split from English. The kinds of writing that we're interested in differs pretty dramatically from our colleagues in English. We're much more interested in writing on post-it notes and tweets and legislation than we are poems or novels. And rhetoric itself is concerned with strategic discourse in everyday life. The digital studies stuff basically encapsulates our interests in writing in digital spaces. So a big part of our department's mission involves research and teaching about professional and technical writing. Professional writing sometimes is called organizational writing because it's any writing that doesn't come with a byline. It is written on behalf of an organization rather than an individual. And technical writing is a form of professional writing carried out by subject matter experts typically, and involves both the processes of writing about technical and scientific matters as well as a series of products or genres. So technical communication happens amongst engineers, software developers, scientists, but also by professional technical writers who work with subject matter experts in their work. And so effective technical communication is extremely practical. It speaks to specific audiences very clearly and concisely. It serves specific purposes like the code commentary that we saw, and it usually helps professionals in technical and scientific fields get work done and share knowledge. So our department offers a minor in professional and technical writing. It's designed primarily for STEM students, but also for students who want to pursue careers as technical writers. It's 18 credit hours. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the minor courses in a few minutes, but STEM majors who take these courses can distinguish themselves in the job market as having more intensive training in writing. The graduate certificate in technical and professional communication is new. It's something that is kind of currently making its way through the labyrinthine system of UK's approval process. We'll see how long it takes to actually get approved, but it's a 3-course sequence that includes a foundational graduate course on technical communication, as well as a course that explores legal and ethical issues in professional and technical writing. So at the graduate level, we hope that one or more of the courses offered in our certificate program will be helpful for students in STEM fields. Currently, electrical engineering graduate students, for example, take our undergraduate technical writing class, which they're usually way too advanced for. So this would be a better fit for those kinds of students, or for any student who's interested in some professionalization in the communication aspects of their field. And at the undergraduate level, I'm going to talk a lot about the technical writing course, and there are also a couple of other courses that might be relevant. Currently, we actually serve about 500 students from the College of Engineering through our department because of the GCCR, the Graduate Composition and Communication requirement, which all undergraduate students have to fulfill for their degree. Civil engineering, chemical engineering, biosystems, and mechanical engineering all use Word Word 204 to fulfill their GCCR. So all those students in those fields are taking technical writing with us. So Word 204 is this kind of linchpin in our professional and technical writing programs. It's an introduction to technical writing processes and products. Students practice technical writing in a variety of genres, including things like memos, transmittals, literature reviews, proposals, progress reports, definitions and instructions, audience profiles, and long technical reports. Students on average write about 6,000 to 7,500 words through the course over the course of short and long projects. Our courses look maybe a little bit different than some of the larger section courses at UK. We cap enrollment to 28 in most of our courses, so it allows us as faculty to give detailed feedback to students both during drafting and assessment of their projects. Our job is to help our students become more effective communicators, and we take that job very, very seriously. So we have to give them, intensive kind of feedback. Students also sometimes come to our Word 204 class with this kind of preconceived notion of what constitutes writing, that they're often informed by high school literature courses or their first year composition courses. And so the kinds of writing that we talk to them about that concern professionals in STEM fields often looks much different, as you all know, right? So this is the kind of stuff that we're interested in, and we spend a fair amount of our time kind of restructuring student perceptions of what counts as writing. Now, students will work a lot on addressing common grammatical and mechanical concerns and broader issues of style. They'll also read a lot in their discipline so that they can kind of absorb some of the ways that professionals write in their field. And these are broadly tactics for writing, tactics of sound and persuasive communication. Things like using vivid but economic language, active constructions, parallelisms, concrete and definite language, correlative expressions, things like that. But we also teach students broader strategies of technical and professional communication. This is kind of the rhetoric side of our department. We spend a lot of time exploring the conventions and norms of writing in specific fields. For example, just basically understanding and following the patterns of a scientific literature review is something that students don't have a lot of previous work with. We help them figure out what those basic moves and patterns are so that they can write the ways that professionals in their fields write. So the other thing about this course is that it's always contextual and inquiry driven. And what I mean by that is that if a student is interested in something like tissue engineering, for example, then their writing projects will be grounded in and modeled on relevant work in that area. If IEEE style is the style that is practiced in their field, then that's what they're going to learn and practice in our class. We're not going to teach them MLA or something that's totally not useful for them. So for undergrads, these are some potential courses that are in the minor. Word 301 is a style course that's intensive on grammatical and mechanical issues related to style. Word 306, Intro to Professions in Writing, is often good for students to think about the kinds of things people do with written communication in a variety of fields. And then 406 is this special topics course I taught last fall as a user experience research methods course. Professor Cagle will talk about it this fall. I'll let her do that. At the graduate level, I kind of mentioned these. There's also a technical editing course. I can't imagine too many CS folks being that interested in those, but Word 604 or Word 612 might be interesting for graduate students if they can fit it into their curriculum. So one of the things I'll say, and I know that you professors know this, I'll give you a quick story. A couple of years ago, my son, who's now a mechanical engineer, was finishing his first week in his first summer internship. And he kind of walks through the front door with this hangdog look on his face, and I said, hey, how's it going? He says, all I did all week was work on documentation, right? So like it's his first internship, and he's be this great mechanical engineer, and all he worked on was documentation. I just laughed, because that's what I try and teach my students, is that you're gonna write a lot in your field. So employers obviously value communication skills. Surveys of employers in many different industries Communication skills are perpetually near the top of the list. 93% of employers agree with this statement. A candidate's capacity to think critically, communicate clearly, and solve complex problems is more important than their undergraduate major. A couple of years ago, I spent about 4 months conducting ethnographic research with a small software development studio as they worked on a learning game for the State Museum of Indiana. And different forms of writing and communication were constantly circulating through the colleagues in the office. And so you might recognize this scrum board picture here, which they use along with daily stand-up meetings to help communicate progress, problems, foster accountability amongst each other, things like that. But one of the biggest communication bottlenecks that my research team and I observed occurred whenever information was shared across professional domains. So I'll put that another way. The software developers had a hard time understanding what the artists and designers wanted, and the artists and designers had a hard time understanding why the software developers couldn't or wouldn't execute some of their ideas. So they didn't speak the same social languages, basically, and this created rifts and delays in their production. They were missing some of that strategic rhetorical acumen that I was talking about earlier. So they shipped the game on time as promised, but the user experience wasn't very good, and the museum ultimately didn't do much with the game. The problems were certainly not all due to communication issues, I'm not arguing that, but the case highlights this broader point, that concern for users and user experience is where there's a significant overlap between what you all do and what Professor Cagle and I do. So wrapping up, we'd love to see you and your students in any of our courses. Professor Cagle and I have both collaborated with computer scientists in the past, and we're certainly open to your ideas about projects that involve writing and communication. If there's anything we can do to help you and your students, don't be a stranger. Let us know. We're here to help. I don't know anything about Shakespeare or literature. This is the stuff that I specialize in. So that's it for me. Cagle's going to come up and talk a little bit about user experience and accessibility. Yes, among other things. There's this. It's a cool picture too.
There's a very cool picture of a woman using an old teletype machine. It's supposed to be up there. Hi, I'm Cagle, as Dr. McNely said, and I am an environmental rhetoric researcher, as well as focusing on some of these issues of usability and technical communication. So I study climate change policy, for example, just to give you an idea of an even broader spectrum of the kinds of writing and communication that people in our field are interested in. As Brian talked about, usability, user experience is a major area of research and application in our field, as it is in your field. And just FYI, I'll probably end up using the phrase TechCom at some point, which is what people in our field abbreviate technical and professional communication to, so just heads up. So to get back to where Brian left off, usability is just one of the areas in which our field focuses on users. In addition to usability, we worry about all of these things. We worry about accessibility and interaction design and information architecture, help documentation, universal design, usability, user experience, user interface design. There's even an entire undergraduate major in experience architecture at MSU, Michigan State, that's run by the technical communication program. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea of the ways in which that we worry about users and worry about and think about their experiences. And as these topics have become increasingly relevant in TechCom, more and more TechCom writing programs have offered coursework in them, including the 406 that Brian mentioned, the advanced topics in professional communication that we teach, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of my talk. I'll be teaching that this coming fall. But first, I kind of want to spend a little time on some of these topics so you can have a better idea of how we approach them in our field and how we think about users in our field, and perhaps that might help you see where there are potential overlaps with your field and the work that you're interested in. Users are really the place of the overlap, right? Users are the ways in which we, as fields, kind of come together
And the things that we make, whether they're the technologies that you make or the technical documentation that we make, they always end up in the hands of users, right? That's sort of where the buck stops. For many technical communicators then, whether that's scholars like us or people practicing in the field, the goal is to think about and improve the communication experiences that truly mediate users' interfaces and relationships with technology, right? Whenever a user meets a technology, there's some sort of communication happening between them. And these relationships can be really complicated. Traditionally, TechCom was this kind of thing, right? It relied on user manuals to manage user technology relationships. This is kind of the classic use case of TechCom. A user needs to use a technology, and so here's an entire user manual with literally everything about that technology, a fully comprehensive guide, and then the user has to page through it and find the information that they need in order to accomplish whatever it is that they want to do, such as adjusting a dulcet tone. However, a lot of work across numerous fields, so not just TechCom, but computer science, human-computer interaction, various fields of engineering, has led to some major shifts in how we think about users and how technical communication can best support them. Let me give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Y'all know Clippy, right? In case you can't see the words, it looks like you need graffiti removed. Would you like help? Look at your paint store. Don't show me this tip again. So Clippy, of course, was the pop-up help feature from Microsoft that showed up in, I believe, Clippy managed to survive a full decade. I think it was 97 to 2007. So, of course, Clippy would pop up whenever you were using Microsoft software and offer to help you if it sensed that perhaps you were struggling to figure out what to do. And pretty much universally, people hated Clippy. I mean, I certainly was not a huge fan. So it might not be the very best example, but it does illustrate the ways in which approaches to technical documentation were moving away from this focus on user manuals. So a better example of this kind of embedded assistance, so that's something people in our field talk about is embedded technical assistance, embedded technical documentation, might look like this, a web design that incorporates explanations of what buttons do, right, as the user is hovering over the button, trying to decide whether or not to click it. So technical communication at that point is no longer just a matter of comprehensively documenting technical systems, though of course it's still that too. There are plenty of examples of systems that require that kind of comprehensive documentation for whatever reason, often legal reasons, right? Instead, it's a matter, technical communication now is a matter of making decisions about when, where, and how to communicate information to users, which is something that programmers and web developers have to think about as well. So in this simple example, we see how communication choices can really affect a user's experience interacting with a system. With and without this just-in-time communication, right, for the user experience is going to look different for a new user to this system. The usability of this system will change with or without this just-in-time communication for the user. So I'm going to shift gears just for a second and talk about another major area of overlap between computer science and TechCom, and this is something that I actually do a lot of work on, which is accessibility and universal design. So accessibility and universal design, I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with one or the other or both. The idea of accessibility, of course, speaks to the fact that users have a really wide variety of abilities. And historically, that has not always been accounted for, right? Historically, a lot of designs have presumed a certain set of abilities, whether that has to do with physical abilities or mental abilities, right? Vision, motion, and so on and so forth. I tried to find actually a really cool picture of a curb cut. So as an illustration of accessibilities, right, the curb cuts on the sidewalk so that wheelchair users can use sidewalks. But it turns out it's really hard to take a cool picture of a curb cut. Shocking, I know. So when we design and communicate about technology, so both designing the technology and communicating about the technology, we need to be thinking about making it accessible to people who will access and experience it in different ways. And it's important for a few reasons. I mean, if you're in business, certainly you want to make your potential customer base as broad as possible. So you want your work to be as accessible as possible. It is it's often legally required because of the Americans with Disabilities Act that software systems be accessible. And of course, finally, it's the right thing to do. Like, you should make your things accessible. So if you think about designing a website, for example, we've got 23.7 million Americans over the age of 18 have some kind of vision impairment. And some subset of that group needs to use screen readers in order to access the web, right? This is not news, probably to anyone in the room. But designing websites and designing software systems, those processes often don't start with the assumption that screen readers will need to be used, right? It ends up being a sort of after-the-fact fix that involves having to communicate further with screen readers, users of screen readers, sorry. Having to communicate further with users of screen readers in some way to make up for whatever deficit for screen reader use was introduced earlier in the design process. Of course, a lot of organizations like W3C offer guidelines for building accessible websites, but this is something that TechCom folks like me work on too. We have people working on questions of universal design, right? How can you best design a website in terms of how it appears visually and then also how it's processed by machine readers in order to be accessible to as wide a variety of people as possible. I mean, in some cases, those are literally questions of communication because it has everything to do with how you visually design something, what kind of vocabulary you use, so on. For example, I use a case study in some of my classes that asks students to come up with communication solutions to the problem of helping people with disabilities evacuate cities in cases of emergency, right? How do you communicate necessary information in an emergency situation to people with a variety of abilities that enable them to evacuate? This case study is based on an actual case. It's New York City, which has been sued twice in the last decade for not providing adequate communications for people with disabilities. And the solutions that students come up with when I teach this case study are often technology-based, right? They're often software-based. So it's building apps that are specifically designed to enable people to select communication, right? Or forms of communication based on whatever their abilities are, right? Allowing people, instead of just producing one single map with evacuation routes and shelter locations, allowing people to parse through multiple maps in order to find the shelters that have wheelchair accessible ramps, for example. So the kinds of communication solutions that I ask students to brainstorm and then write up, propose, whatever, in my classes often involve a technology component, right? The writing, the communication, and the technology are inextricable when we think about how to actually apply accessibility and universal design in everyday life. I will probably be teaching that case, actually, in Word 406. Again, picture a very cool image, old-timey image of a woman using a teletype. In this class that I'm teaching in the fall, Advanced Topics in Professional Writing, it meets Tuesday, Thursday from 12:30 to 1:45. I'm going to be focusing on accessibility and universal design, but also the idea of accommodation. So not accommodation, again, in the disability sense, like accommodations for disability, rather accommodation in rhetoric is a technical term that means to accommodate, to change technical information to suit different audiences. So for example, when you communicate about software security concerns, I'm guessing you would do it very differently with the people in this room than you would with, say, your uncle who doesn't really know much about computers, or with Congress, which is charged with passing laws to provide computer security, right? You're going to communicate the same information in different ways for different audiences, and that's a process we call accommodation. This class will have a lot of room, as Dr. McNely was talking about, for students to drive their own projects, drive their own topics, pursue things that are of interest to them. So I hope you will consider suggesting it to your students if you think it would be relevant to them. And if you think that user-focused issues like these might be useful to them for their future careers. So I'm finished as well. How are we on time?
We have a few minutes for questions.
Okay. Do you want to? Any
You're
questions?
We got questions. We might not. I don't think we got this one. Okay. Actually, and in the previous one of the essay years ago called The Two Cultures, which it was by what, C.P. Snow, if I'm remembering right?
That sounds right.
Where he was bemoaning the fact that scientists couldn't speak to humanities people and vice versa. And so, can the mathematicians speak to the computer scientists? Was the first talk.
Right.
And here, can the artists speak to the people who are actually building a website is the question in the second. And so, let me turn that into a question now. Is there a generic problem and a generic way of solving the problem of this imbalance between the two cultures that might need to speak to each other?
I would say no, in the sense that, one of the problems that people in TechCom run into all the time is precisely that there is particular language to each culture, right, whether it's mathematicians or computer scientists or whoever. And to some extent, if you don't have the expert knowledge that they have, then there's a barrier that you just can't cross, right? So I'm teaching another class for chemistry majors to meet their writing requirement, graduation writing requirement this semester. And my husband is a chemist, so I make him help me grade things, right? To make sure that the students are not just pleasing me and making up chemistry words. However, I mean, I assume they wouldn't, they're great, but just in case. However, I think that there are strategies that you can sort of generically apply. So we have in our field the concept of discourse and discourse communities. So if you know that you're facing that problem, if you know the problem you're having in trying to communicate with someone is the fact that they belong to this other discourse community and are literally speaking a different language, then that's the first step to solving the problem, right? And to trying to build some kind of bridge or build a shared dictionary or whatever. What is it they say, the first step is admitting you have a problem? Yeah.
I mean, everything that Professor Cagle said, the stuff that I talked about, the tactics versus strategies. So we discuss that in technical writing courses as a rhetorical strategy, understanding that people are situated differently, and that in order for you to be able to talk to the artist when you're trying to program something that they want you to do that's completely unfeasible, you have to find what we rhetoricians call stasis. What's the point at which we can have some basic understanding of agreement before we figure out where we disagree? And so these are strategies that we try and teach our technical writing students to deploy when they're out in the job market. And then there are some actual hands-on things that they can do to kind of smooth over the differences in social languages that people have, or discourse communities that people have. So does it work all the time? No, but if they leave here better equipped, knowing some basic strategy, hopefully it can be a better outcome for them on the job market in their career.
Well, I had another question. I'm going to monopolize the questions. One of your areas of research then is accessibility. If I've got a website that I want to make sure meets standards of accessibility, standards I know nothing about, can I send it to you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are some great kind of automated tools out there that you can use to test websites. Like you literally just dump the code in, and then it'll check it for screen reader compatibility, for example. So I can definitely share those with anybody who's interested. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I use W3C's standards mostly when I'm teaching that stuff because they're pretty clear. They can have like a checklist that you can.
Well, certainly I use the W3C facilities to make sure that my HTML passes muster, but that's not the same as accessibility.
No, exactly. That's a really good point. So there is, there's basic work that does have to happen behind the scenes with HTML, for example, for accessibility. So, a classic example is screen readers read headings. So you could set a screen reader to check heading levels so that if someone is just, like imagine you as a sighted user using Wikipedia. You don't go to Wikipedia, well, maybe you do, I don't know, we're all nerds in this room, but like most use cases, you're not going to go to Wikipedia and just read a page top to bottom. You're going to look for like one fact or one, you're just interested in this section. Imagine if you didn't have that option. Imagine if you had to listen to the entire page before getting to the spot that you want to get to. Headings
actually do in class? Like, what is a class?
So classes are very hands-on, lots of small group work and lots of discussion-oriented kinds of things that build up to practice in class with writing in certain genres. So you're maybe working either alone or in a small group of 4 on creating a process description for wind turbines or something like that, so that you're working on some of the things that we're learning as we're reading the textbook. Lots of hands-on feedback from the professor and from peers in the class as well on looking out for those stylistic or tactical things in your writing, so that when you turn something in, it's already been vetted in class, and you've improved your writing along the way, hopefully. So lots of discussion, lots of hands-on, not a lot of lecture, and hopefully some fun. Most of the students tend to have fun in class as well as improving. By the way, Professor Finkel has a great page on style and writing. If you haven't seen it, that's a great resource that I actually share with my tech writings.
Great, it's on my front page at the bottom. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.